Hey, this is Gerd Handel, and welcome to the Inner Light Project. This show is for anyone who's wanting to lead a happier, healthier, and enlightened life. Create more self-love, inject more joy and abundance into their daily life. Join me for inspiring interviews and spiritual topics so you can shine your inner light. Hello and welcome to the Inner Light Project. My name is Gerd Handel and oh my god, I'm just so grateful that we are in mid-January right now. There is definitely a massive transformation happening in the world right now. I know we're actually going through a bit of a karmic cycle, and for some people it's a 15-year cycle that's ending on the 20th of January. So at the end of this week there is going to be massive shifts for a lot of people, and a lot of the lessons that they have to learn in the 15 years are now finally being let go. And so I just really was like sitting in with everything these last few weeks and really just looking at how we share everything on this podcast. And I thought, you know what, it's time to really just go on a deeper level than ever before. So every month I will be talking about a topic that resonates with what I'll be sharing every month. And that will be the conversations that I'll be having with people on the show or by myself. And so this month is all about surrender and surrendering from within. Now, if you haven't listened to the previous episode before this, it was with the beautiful April Roberts. Please check it out. It was absolutely fantastic. And it's all about really coming back home to yourself as a woman, taking your power back and really surrendering from within. Now, this week I have an awesome guest on the show, and she's just an amazing soul. Somebody that I've been following on social media actually for a good year or so. And she really just intrigued me because I really relate with this person culturally because of the upbringings that we had, and I really related with a lot of her content. So her name is Rathika Marsh. She's a psychologist and provides very highly skilled containers of heart-based guidance, support and challenges, which enables women to find freedom in their life. She guides women through trauma and emotional wounds from adult and childhood life. So she really is about helping women to really come back home to themselves. And this is again why I'm talking about the importance of surrender. So this month is all about surrender, and Rathika is definitely all about surrendering from within. She is a former psychologist. She is now very deep in the spiritual world, and you'll absolutely love this episode about how the psychology world sees people with trauma, but actually everyone has trauma. Whether you've had a great upbringing or not, we all have some level of trauma. Hi, Rathika. I'm so grateful to have you on the show, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I love being on, other people's podcasts and sharing my journey, sharing my messages. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. I've been following your journey for quite a few years now, and it's just amazing to see your transformation as being a psychologist to really being more in the spiritual side of the work that you do.
Yes, yeah, it's definitely been a journey, and it continues to be. It's like this kind of constant growth, like periods of expansion, periods of contraction, and this like ebb and flow between the two spaces, because that's what healing and growth is about, being in those two spaces and being able to navigate that.
Yeah.
And it continues.
Beautiful. And so I want to kind of start from the beginning. What was your life like before you became a psychologist?
Before I became a psychologist, so this is now I started training as a psychologist in 2007. So it was quite a while ago now. I was 27. So I was like in a good space on the surface of things, but also I was in a space of wanting to, I guess, have that validation.
Yeah.
The validation of I'm intelligent enough, because that was a big wound for me growing up, that I just didn't really I felt like the black sheep. I didn't fit the kind of Asian mold of what other people were doing, which was going
Yeah.
down the typical medical route, or dentistry, or doing something with maths or law and all that, like really kind of what would be in quotation marks intelligent stuff, right? The law and all that kind of thing. And I was like, that is not what I want to do. And yeah, so it was this journey of I guess always I was always like this. I had this rebel side of me, like a really good girl, but like this rebel side of me. I'd be the argumentative one. I'd be the one like fighting back and not scared of, like, squaring up to my dad or whatever. And yeah, so when I kind of like, I felt like I was always in that black sheep thing, that always in that space of being seen as the failure because I
Mm.
didn't get the grades that, other Asian kids were getting. I felt like I had a really difficult kind of mental health time during my teens, a very silent struggle.
Yeah.
And it really affected my grades. And whilst everybody was sort of getting like, these A stars, because that was the typical kind of thing, you know,
Yeah.
and this comparison, this big comparison of like, okay, it's GCSE day, what have all the kids got
Oh
in their
God.
results? And the community literally calling around to find out like what people got. And I didn't get terrible results, but I didn't get any A's. I think I got like 7 B's and 2 C's, and to a lot of people that would be amazing,
It's
but
amazing. Yeah.
my family, it was like, how like there was a lot of shame there
Hmm.
for my parents. And so it's a very like a being brought up in a very competitive status
Hmm.
sort of environment, and so then that brought shame for my parents, and then as a result also shame for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
totally
that,
understand. Oops, sorry. I was just going to say, I totally understand what you're saying because I'm the same, actually, funny enough. I didn't get like the top grades. I grew up having almost like, for me, I had like a lost identity growing up in an environment where I didn't really see people like myself, but then there was this pressure to succeed and be successful. I didn't follow the same route either. I was actually a journalist.
yes,
And when
yes.
I first shared that I was studying journalism, the whole community was like, oh, but my
Mm.
son's a doctor. And I'm like, good for you, auntie. Like, I'm like, what is this comparison? Like you said, so I didn't get all A's at GCSE, even at A levels. Like I even for English literature language, I got 2 C's and I managed to still become a journalist. And it made me realize that grades don't define us. We define who we become.
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
only time, and I don't know if you felt this, like the only time I actually felt like smart was when I was actually studying my master's and I was around Oxford and Cambridge students. And I was like, damn, I'm actually quite smart. I never
yeah,
felt like that growing up. It was only later in life I thought, whoa, I'm
yeah,
really smart, but in a different way to the textbook, I guess. Yes.
yes, yeah. It's that, like, for me, it's definitely been a journey of redefining what intelligence looks like.
Yeah.
And what that means. Like, you can be the most academic person and be highly emotionally unintelligent,
Yeah.
or you can be so like highly academic and emotionally intelligent. But a lot of it was redefining, what is my intelligence. Like, I have creative artistry as an intelligence, and
Mm.
I can like, I have a vision for things. I can put together branding around stuff and create that. I've got like this feeling of, okay, what is this, like, this vision of what this program's going to be like, for example,
Yeah.
and what's the energy around it? How do I want to portray the feel of it? You know, so there's so many intelligences that we have. And it's definitely been like a journey of deconstructing, like, what is that, what does it look like for me? And it sort of come back to this space of enoughness,
Mm.
enoughness and worth. And um
Yeah.
when you're brought up in a culture where, and I'm not, this doesn't represent all Asians, right? But
Yes.
in
just a
definitely in
just a small minority.
yeah. Like in my family, definitely in my community, there's a huge focus on what you look like,
Yes. Oh my God.
on your body, not being too skinny, but not being like chunky.
Yeah.
And then and a huge focus on,
Academics,
academics and success and
status. Oh,
status and wealth and the weddings and like, yeah, all of that kind of stuff. And you can see like the deep layers of generational pride, but also shame
yeah. Yeah.
that's
And
there.
and it starts from such a young age that we don't even realize it's happening. It's only as we get older we're like, oh, that's not normal. And when you start to talk to people from all different walks of life, then you're like, oh, this is quite a similar pattern in other communities as well. So it wasn't just people who are a small minority of the South Asian community. It's in every community, but in a slightly different way.
Yes, absolutely. And I see that with my clients. I have a lot of women from all walks of life working with me, and it's just really, really interesting how much trauma there is, how much you like the message that we're given around trauma is that and this is true to a degree, but the message that I always kind of was taught, even as a psychologist, was, trauma is highly associated with lower socioeconomic
Oh,
grouping, and trauma is associated with poverty, with like those factors which put you in where you tick the boxes for the ACEs. I don't know if you know about ACEs, but
yeah.
um it's like they created like this profile of, if you have experienced these things like domestic violence, a parent with a drug addiction, being a carer, emotional abuse or sexual abuse, all those kind of
Yeah.
things, you're at higher risk of mental health issues, right? So, and which is true, because
Yeah.
you're starting from a vulnerable space of maybe not being held in the way that your basic needs need to be held.
Mm.
But what I've seen from like the people who and have worked with me is that there is so much trauma as
Yes.
well in other groupings, and it's really interesting. Like, yeah, that's been such an eye opener for me,
Wow.
to see that it's not just, it's not just like certain groups. um and yeah, when I say trauma as well, I mean, like, a lot of women that come and work with me have experienced some form of sexual abuse,
Mm.
have experienced some form of either in childhood or like incidences in adulthood,
Yeah.
where there's been a crossing of, a clear kind of abuse there, or there's been a lot of childhood trauma patterns that emerge in adulthood.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's complex. It's a complex thing.
Yeah. 100% relate with what you're saying, because even with my clients, they come from all walks of life. And yeah, okay, you might have grown up in a wealthy family, but generations back you would have had a family member who was at a low socioeconomic place, and that pattern then is handed over from generation to generation. I really don't
Yeah.
feel like it's It's people who are better off that they don't have problems. I think sometimes there's more problems there as well
Yeah.
that we don't know about. And it fascinates me like that yourself. Like, you know, it opens your eyes up to a new world that actually trauma exists in every family. Even if you had the most, you know, happiest childhood, there will be some elements of trauma still there.
Yes. And it's kind of like, breaking that myth that, if you're brought up in a family where you're provided for financially, or that you're looked after, that you go to private school, even like those kind of things, that means that your emotional needs are met. And that often isn't like
Yeah.
that often isn't the case. They might be, but in a lot of situations that they're also not.
Yeah. It's interesting you're saying that because I worked with young people about a decade ago for a charity. I used to teach them how to produce films. And it was interesting when I was working with certain groups. And, you know, when I'd worked with young people who came from very privileged backgrounds, they were struggling to actually pay attention. And there was underlying issues which I started to realize. And, you know, a lot of people don't realize that, yes, okay, you can have privilege, but actually everybody in this world has trauma, little or big. We all have some trauma because it's also generational, it's ancestral, it's cultural, it's societal baggage that we've picked up from such a young age.
Yes, yeah. And I guess that's the piece. It's like, there are obviously more vulnerable um groups of people, who are going to be affected and are more vulnerable to trauma, right?
Yeah.
But there's also like these hidden groups. There's these hidden groups of people who, because there's the tick boxes of what they have, they can
Mm.
actually then feel this sense of, well, what do I have to worry about? Why do I feel this shit way about myself? Why do I not like
Mm.
this sense of self-worth? Why do I always go for, relationships where I am not treated well? Or and so you can, because you've had that, like, because you've had tick boxes of how your needs have been met in childhood, you can then just end up berating yourself even more, because it seems as though there's no reason for you to feel this way other than you being the problem.
Yeah. I think what's fascinating is I think with women in particular, you can be the most successful women, you can have like the amazing career, you know, you can have an amazing place, but we have deeper wounds that have been handed from generations to generations. Like, you know, there was a time where women couldn't even buy their own houses. You know, everything was in the man's name. Women had like spending habits. And, you know, you look back at the lineage and you start to understand why women are feeling the way they feel. And it's deeply rooted from how patriarchy and how women were treated from decades ago.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And also, adding to it, there's also this confusion of identity as well with women now. Like, if you look at, the entrepreneurial sort of journey as a woman, um, or like people doing the work that we do, and you're trying to grow a business and all of those things, like, actually, you can end up like moving so much into the masculine space,
Yes.
and it's like, you can lose sight of yourself in the feminine.
Hmm.
And it's actually like a confusing, it's a confusing journey, where it's like, okay, I want to be independent, I want to make money, I want to do the things that I want to do, but how do I also step back into my feminine, so that there's that harmony, there's that
Yeah.
harmony in relationship with yourself and with your family.
Yeah. I don't know about for you, but for me, like growing up, it was I guess it's like the immigrant trauma, right? So your parents are hard workers. And I grew up seeing that from a young age and like family around me. So I always was very much in this masculine energy. Then I ended up becoming a journalist and they're like, you need to be this alpha female. And I was always on the go. And then when I left that world and I started to create my business, I was pushing and pushing, living off hardly hours sleep, which was ridiculous when I look back. But
Mm.
it was the trauma, obviously, the immigrant wound trauma of, always needing to
Yes.
work hard. And I didn't know how to receive, that was my biggest problem growing up. I didn't know how to receive because no one really showed me, or self-love
Yeah.
as well. It wasn't mirrored for me because within our community, most of the time the women don't know how to love themselves. And that's okay, but we have to learn how to then learn to love ourselves, which
Yeah.
can be a whole
Yeah.
new ball game of deep wounds that come out. But it was
Yeah.
only till I actually had a kidney problem where I ended up having like an operation, is when I had to slow the fuck down. And that's when I had to surrender. And my partner at that time was just like, Gerds, what the hell are you doing? Like, you need to slow down. And I was like, no, but I've got a business. I've got to help people. I've got to change the world. And he's
Yeah.
like, you're damaging yourself right now. And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
And that was the only time I started to come back home to the feminine. So then it was learning how to balance, like you said, the masculine and the feminine. We need both, but we have to, as women, I feel since like the 80s era, have been in these shoulder pads, powerhouse energy, like we have to get shit done like men, but actually we just need to be ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, that learning to receive, the learning of softness, the learning of like everything doesn't have to be done now.
Yeah.
Like, well, it doesn't have to be done today. It's okay. Things can be like spread out. And yeah, it's sometimes your body is like, you have to go to those. It's a shame, isn't it, that we have to go to those places to
Yeah.
learn that, right? To go to those places of feeling unwell physically to learn the harsh lesson, right?
Yeah. I don't know if you've noticed it, but even the older generation of women, that's the reason why they were getting sicker, because they weren't slowing down and listening to their bodies. And even men, like I look back at a lot of the businessmen in the 80s and 90s, why were they getting health conditions? Because they weren't slowing down as well and, relaxing and taking time out in nature and connecting with themselves.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
What was like your turning point to then like enter the feminine?
Mm, that's a good question. Probably entering the feminine for me was connecting with my emotions,
Mm.
connecting with um it was almost like, that like permission to be me and going on that journey of like, oh, what, I can just show up as me, and it's okay, that I'm still, what, I'd still be loved.
Mm.
And like also facing, like really facing those dark shadows, which in some ways is a masculine, in some ways it's a masculine act, like facing the darkest parts of yourself. But in the darkest parts of yourself is where the feminine lies, it's like the part of you that fears something, or that doesn't feel that sense of enoughness, or fears rejection and abandonment, or whatever it might be. And like when you go to those places and connect with that vulnerability
Mm.
within yourself, then you're tapping into the feminine. And also, in that journey as well, like learning to connect with joy. And like for me, that's been a huge journey. And for my clients as well, like often people who come and work with me, like, and I think this is the same for a lot of people, they don't actually know what it is that brings them joy. They don't know that they're kind of so, people are so used to being in um the space of like adapting themselves or people pleasing their
Mm.
partners or their children or their families, that they have no idea like what really lights them up and brings them joy. And not just that, but like actually giving yourself permission to go and do those things and explore it. So yeah, like a huge part of my journey has been, I've been married, well, with my partner since, well, for more than 22 years.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, quite a long time. So I was 21 when I met him, and um, I was still a baby, really, in that I didn't have that. I'd never had that experience of what is it that I want? What is it that I want to experience? And I didn't feel brave enough to go after those things. So
Yeah.
it wasn't until like the last sort of 3 years that I thought, right, I'm gonna go and do these things by myself. I'm gonna go and hang out like abroad by myself, for example, and see what that like brings.
Wow.
And um it's quite like a revolutionary thing to do when you've been in the same relationship dynamic where you kind of like adjust with each other all the time, and you do things together. You don't go and do stuff by yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So to have those like conversations, and doing that kind of thing has been such an awakening, of like really giving myself full permission to explore what I need to explore.
Yeah.
And
It's almost, oh, sorry, go on.
it's okay. I was just going to say, and actually, like the denial of it, the denial of those kind of simple explorations, just led to suppression. The
Hmm.
suppression was the thing that brought out like ugly sort of dark shadows. It kind of put me into like these patterns of secrecy or shame
Hmm.
or things like that. And as soon as I started giving myself permission to experience joy, to explore myself, at a deeper level, to go after my dreams, it's like everything else started clicking. So my relationship with my husband started feeling more aligned. Our vision together has shifted and felt more aligned. I felt closer to my partner and my son because my needs are being met.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not even somebody else meeting my needs. So it's right. It's not my husband meeting my needs. Actually, it's me meeting my needs.
Yeah. And I feel that's the inner child, right? Our inner child, we've suppressed them for so long. And when we first give ourselves that permission, it's like the inner child comes out, and then it's like, what do you need? And she's like, I want to play. And then it's like going
Yeah.
back to like letting her be free and letting the inner boy out of your husband be free as well, right? It's allowing you to play the dance of life. And I think a lot of us in this world have become so serious, we're like, our jobs and our career paths and what we need to be in society, going back to our culture, right? We have to hit all these deadlines, but that's not life is being in the moment. Life is having that joyfulness. Life is dancing together.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing that people lose sight of. You get on this treadmill and you've got to be mindful of it when you're running your own business as well.
Yeah.
This treadmill of like, just pushing and forcing, and like actually you can end up being in this fear state constantly and without even realizing it.
Yeah. I,
And you can so easily lose sight of like, okay, hold on a minute, what have I done today that feels, or it could be a little experience, like what have I connected to today that has brought me joy?
100%. Like that, just with what you're saying, reminds me of where I was a few years ago. So I was actually bedbound for a few years, Radhika,
Mm,
with because I had a kidney operation. It went fine. Then I ended up having kidney disease, and I was like, this is not my life. I
yeah.
have to find a way. But
Mm,
in those moments, I had to find moments of joy when I'd be tired to go to the kitchen, or I'd be tired to just like get up and stuff. I had to realize like there is joy in the little things, joy getting out of bed today, joy just having a little
yeah,
dance. And I never grew up thinking that way, right? It's only when we're in those moments where you start to understand that actually joy can be anything. It doesn't have to be this magical thing where you're running around in a field or something.
yeah, yeah. It
Or you're
doesn't have
playing.
yeah, it doesn't have to be these huge acts. It
Yeah.
could be like, yeah, like even now I'm like looking out, out through the window, and the leaves have all turned like this goldeny
Mm.
yellow color, and it's so beautiful,
Yeah.
the way
It's
that the light
magic.
is catching it, and yeah.
And that's being in the present moment and the joyfulness that you're saying, right? It's we are too busy running 10 steps ahead instead of actually being where we are right now on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, yeah. And you can get caught up in it. You can get caught up in this whole like space around manifestation, around
Yes.
all of those kind of dialogues, right? Which are quite a westernized phenomenon, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're not careful, you're just living in the future, living in, I want the vision to come true, I want the vision to come true. And you've forgotten that the vision that you wanted 3 years ago has come true.
Yeah.
It's now, right?
It's interesting you're saying that. I was talking to a friend, God, a few months back, and she's like, I don't know why this is not happening so quickly. And I was like, do you remember when we were at university? She was like, yeah. I was like, it took us 3 years to get our degrees. And she's like, oh. And I'm like, yeah, things are not going to happen straight away. We've got to just keep moving forward with it. But it'll eventually happen, but there's no rush. Things don't
Yes.
have to be so quick. I think we're just living in a fast-paced world right now that thinks, oh, I'll just manifest once and it'll come to me.
Yeah, yeah.
A bit like the Aladdin, right? When you rub the
Yeah.
genie. I wanted to talk to you about something that I actually saw recently on your social media about spiritual bypassing and what happened to you. Because I feel like I've personally been through it myself as well. I know there's a lot of people of color who've been out there and have felt this. A lot of the tools that are used within the spiritual community comes from our cultures, but we're made to feel like we're kind of talked down to. I just wanted
Hmm.
to get what was your experience of being in the spiritual community?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in like different, I guess I've been in a lot of different spaces. I've invested in a lot of different groups and trainings and learning and so on. And it's like, there can be that sense of, okay, so there's two different things here, I think.
Yeah.
There's like your responsibility for your wounds,
Yes.
ultimately. And there's also the bit around the bigger picture of, the spiritual space is probably like a such a sensitive space around this topic, around cultural appropriation, around all of that, because it's supposed to be a space of really equality.
Yes.
Like it doesn't have to be that way, but you'd think that in the spiritual space that there would be more Asian faces that have large followings. You'd think that there would be more, like, I guess, higher end successful
Yeah.
Asian businesswomen, or um, people from communities where a lot of these practices have essentially been taken from, right? And so it can feel so sensitive, because it's like the perfect example is, I was brought up, right, from a family who immigrated to England from Sri Lanka. I was given an English name because my parents felt at the time like there was some level of shame about having an Asian name. And
Yeah.
they wanted to make it easy for white people,
Yeah.
right? So I had
Yeah.
to take on an English name.
Gosh.
And then I changed it when I got married. I actually changed it anyway before then. My middle name to my first name.
Wow.
My name was Angela.
Oh wow.
Yeah, my name is Angela, and then I've changed that to my middle name. And now when I see like people, when I see white people and they have an Asian name,
Yes.
like
Oh.
or there be something, or
Saraswati.
the- like I just find it really insensitive.
Yeah, same, same,
And it
same.
and that's the kind of thing. It's like it's just that piece around.
I think it's just respect, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like a total lack of awareness, though, of
Mm.
wounds that can be carried by people of color. And I have actually not felt it as much as I have done in the spiritual space.
Oh.
I didn't really feel it much before that. So
Hmm.
it's really, really interesting. And at the same time, the way that I see it is I don't I don't want to get hung up on those wounds because I'm here to do what I'm here to do.
Yeah.
And I'm not letting other things like that get in the way of my mission and what I'm here to do and how I'm here to serve people and my beautiful presence and the beauty that I bring and the perspective that I bring as a woman of color,
Hmm.
a woman of color who's been brought up in England,
Yeah.
that like the richness of that experience, of that experience and my unique experience, it just can't be replaced by somebody who's calling themselves
Yeah.
by an Asian name.
I really understand what you're saying because a few years back I was getting so mad when like all these people like not all these people I'm saying but like people that had who were English and they had South Asian names. It used to irritate me and they'd want to be on my podcast and I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't have you on the podcast. And they'd be like, why? And it's because I'm like, I just don't understand why using the term guru or certain things, because for me, guru, like I'm Punjabi, so I my parents emigrated here as well. And you know, for me, guru was like in the Sikh background, the 10 gurus. And I don't see somebody who calls himself a guru because for me it's like you're beyond
Yeah,
humans.
yeah.
Everyone, for me, I've grown up learning to respect everyone as equal. So when somebody calls themselves guru, to me that's a sign of ego. And
Yeah,
so I just it just never sit well with me, or you know, the names as well. And I struggled, like, well, not struggled, I grew up, you know, with, I had my actual first name, so Gurdeep, and you know, my whole life people would get it wrong or they would just be ignorant. And
yeah,
I understand with what you're saying, because one of my ex-boyfriends many years ago had the same thing where his parents gave him an English name and then his Indian name was his second name. And you know, it was so confusing for me, but I understand why people did it. um but then
yeah.
it causes this layer of complexity of identity crisis. Who are you? But yeah, I always struggled with when people gave themselves South Asian names, because it's like, oh, we're going to take this term because we've created a business and we're going to brand ourselves as that. And it's like, no, please don't do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. And it's difficult. I mean, I also see the other side of it, which
Yeah.
is like it's really beautiful that somebody has absolutely adored the Asian culture to call themselves by an Asian name. When actually, like for years and years, you know, Asian culture has been mocked or people have been seen in a certain way. We've been represented in films as like, you know,
Yeah.
some geeky Asian kid with glasses,
Yeah.
right? And and it's just so embarrassing.
Yeah.
So like it's really beautiful to see that like, you know, there's an appreciation of what has traditionally been in our line. And I guess the piece that I come back to from the different experiences I've had with this situation is coming back to like who I am, to
Mm.
my voice, to my message, to my ancestry, to the
Yeah.
beauty of that. And that's what actually like this experience that I had taught me, because you know, essentially it was a container where we were learning about indigenous practice
Oh, wow.
that was led by a white woman. And
Mm.
actually, the container was really beautiful. I learned so much from it,
Yeah.
which is why it was confusing. But then the messaging group was kept open. And in that group, this is months later,
Yeah.
um, I just felt this like, there was a lot of talking about altar practice and our connection with that, and it's quite vulnerable for me as an Asian person to talk about like my lack of connection that I felt with that, for example.
Hmm.
And then to sort of then receive like this patronizing tone
Yeah.
from somebody who like has maybe been to India, stayed in an ashram, and it's kind of like not wanting to disrespect their journey as well,
Yeah.
but it's that patronizing tone, and
Yeah.
this is where like people aren't even aware of it. It's like I've had an altar in my generation for like for hundreds of years, you
Wow.
know. So
Yeah.
there's so many subtleties to it, and yeah, I think the experience has brought me back to it's really kind of it all kicked off, and I was basically told, you can't join the next layer of training unless you transcend your wounds around
No.
this. And they
No.
said, the person, the elder who was supporting the the lady to run this, they kind of used his voice as like the elder voice, which was,
Wow.
we don't accept any talk about cultural appropriation. So you transcend these wounds, and if you can transcend them, then you can join us. And it was like it was basically gaslighting,
Yes.
and it was so confusing
Mm.
because amongst it, I felt this deep rejection
Yeah. Yeah.
until I realized about 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
Somebody pointed it out to me, and they were like, "Yeah, isn't this gaslighting?"
Yeah, it's gaslighting. It really is. And
And the email was confusing. So essentially, the whole thing was really confusing because it was like, okay, we're learning about indigenous practice, and I loved the container.
yeah.
Actually, what you're saying, what this person was saying, what these people were saying, essentially was this program, this training is for people who are going to listen and do what we say.
Yeah.
And if you're angry, if you have human emotion, if you don't agree with things, if you challenge people in an activated way, then you're bad, you know,
It's like
or
the
like,
colonization all over again.
yes, and that's exactly what it was. It was like that, the colonizer's voice, like,
Yeah.
silencing the one Asian woman in the container.
Yeah. It's because from my own experience, it's usually they're scared of what we're going to share because we have those natural awarenesses. Like I really understand with what you're saying because a few years back, the whole yogi bhajan, Kundalini yoga. So I had a lot of friends who were doing it, and they weren't people of color. And they started telling me what was happening, and I'm like, and I'm Punjabi, right? So yogi bhajan was a Sikh man who took Sikh spiritual practices and put it into yoga, and then the words got changed, like Satanam would like be separated to Satnam, and certain things he'd rechanged and stuff. And
Mm.
so then I had people who weren't people of color trying to tell me what the Sikh background is, and I'm like, mate, I grew up in this environment. I went to
Yeah,
the temple. I sang prayers on stage. I have a big awareness, but they would then talk down to me like I didn't
yeah.
know anything. And I'm like, hold up, this is in my lineage. And
Mm.
it really does kind of,
Rating.
yeah, and it's
And
frustrating and it's gaslighting and it's
yeah,
you want to
there's
scream.
there's also like this complexity as well of like, with parents who were immigrants, it's
Yeah.
like my parents' priority was not teaching me necessarily like the ins and outs of like what everything means to do with an altar. So it's like my
Mm.
mum would be steeped in like her altar, like every day she'd be lighting the wick, and like, her things that she did, her rituals. but nobody ever explained to me what any of those things meant.
Yes, same, same. We go to the temple, but didn't really. We sit there and be like, "Oh, what's
Yeah,
this about?"
you just get and do what you're told, right? It's
Yeah.
like going to a wedding, right? The number of
Oh God.
Sri Lankan weddings I've been to, and it was only when I got to my wedding that I was like, okay, what does this actually mean? So then you can have like in white people or people from other cultures or whatever actually understanding what things mean and coming and telling you, and you
Yeah.
don't know, right? But it's in your lineage, it's deeply rooted in your daily practice for like, 40 years, and then you've got somebody coming and telling you what it means, and it brings up this like it brings
Trigger.
up shame, it brings up discomfort,
Hmm.
it brings up like this resentment, all of those things. And it's like you have to kind of look beyond that and really
Hmm.
come back to, okay, like what somebody has learnt on a 200-hour training course or whatever is never going to replace the ancestral wisdom that you have in your lineage.
Exactly. And I
You've
think,
got to, like, yeah, that the more connection you develop with that,
yeah,
the stronger you'll not be worrying. You're not going to be worrying about what other people are doing.
I think all. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just saying you're not going to be worrying about what other people are doing as much because you're going to be so in your lane, in your truth, in what you have to share with the world.
100%. And what I realized in those moments was that I just needed to go back a bit more into my culture and understand things on a deeper level.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that it has to be used in my work, but it helps me to have a deeper understanding of where I come from, what are the teachings that I can actually share. But also what I realized in those situations that, you were in that group setting, that's not your community then. It's a blessing. The
Yes.
universe is kind of saying to you that actually you do not need to know this stuff. You already know a lot of it already because it's within you. You just need to
Yes.
dig deeper within yourself and understand and take yourself out of that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. It was like a yanking from the universe, literally. Like the way that it all unfolded was like, okay, I'm saving you.
Yeah.
Like, don't invest 12 grand in this thing.
Yeah. Do it
Wow.
within yourself. Yeah.
Like, and then
Yeah.
after the period of like, that shake up, that nervous system shake up where it was like, oh my gosh, like I feel this so in such a painful, horrible, awful way, and just feeling so vulnerable, so questioning myself,
Hmm.
questioning like, did I respond in a bad way? Was I being passive aggressive? Like, kind of like really questioning myself. After coming out of that, it actually felt like I just felt at peace,
Hmm.
like this deep sense of peace around things and who I am, and it's just really informed like, what I do and how I want to lead spaces, and just this thing around like, I guess, inclusion of um people from different backgrounds, and yeah, all communities.
Yeah. I think what I've realized, and I think you might have noticed as well, is that, because we have businesses, we're like, oh, we need to learn the next thing and this and that and get this training and this. But actually, we don't need half of those things. We just need to listen to the wisdom from within. We already have those gifts, we already have those talents. We just think that we need another label in order to make ourselves look better in the world.
Yes, yeah, it's true. I also think though that there is like, if you desire something, and that's the bit to like work out, like, am I desiring something because I want to get really skilled at this thing and it feels really
Mm,
exciting?
yeah.
Or am I desiring this thing because I feel shit about myself?
Yeah. That's a good way of seeing it. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so then it's like when I did my doctorate, like, it doesn't matter how high you get with your education.
Yeah.
If even when I got onto the doctorate, my narrative around it was, well, it's not kind of like a proper doctorate.
Oh God, what?
It was like, at the University of Bristol, and
Oh God.
and what was the other narrative? It was like, I fluked it. That's
No.
I got on one of the final places. So, but there were only 13 places anyway, out of however many hundreds of people who applied. So it was like this real sort of harsh narrative inside, um that was ruling it. So,
Mm.
doing things from that place is different from doing things from that place of, I'm really excited to learn this thing. And like, there's a training that I'm running in January called the Academy of Healing, and that's about teaching you how do you become, um a better, more skilled practitioner of healing,
Mm.
because we do need those skills actually around trauma attunement, around how do we support clients in a powerful way to create that longer lasting change,
Mm.
and all of those things, bringing in different modalities. So, I sort of feel like, we do need that skill set, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes there's this message of, you don't need any of those things, just be you. But actually, when it comes to supporting people around trauma, right, you
Oh
do
no,
actually.
yeah, you do. You're right. You need to have that awareness, and yeah.
Yeah, so I think that message sometimes, sometimes I think people get confused with it. Like,
I think it's I think it's
yeah,
different when you have that skill set from a young age and you've been doing it your entire life. Not everybody has that, right? Some people
yes,
just, I think that's the difference. So if you've naturally had it for like years and years, that's different. But then you're right, there are people that are like, okay, yep, I want to become this, and yeah, 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 and they're like, oh yeah, I will help people with trauma. But actually, no, you're right. They need to learn the tools in order to
yes,
help support people on a better level, instead of being triggered, because there's a lot of people that get triggered by other people's trauma when they're helping them.
yes, yeah, exactly. Or people are scared. People are scared, of doing the wrong thing.
Oh yeah, I never thought about that actually.
Yeah, people are so scared of doing the wrong thing, of not being, if I kind of go to this place with my client, then like, what if I do it wrong? And then, so then you don't go to the places, you don't go to the difficult places because you're like frightened.
Oh, that's fascinating, actually. Yeah,
Yeah.
that
So,
this.
because there's so much of that narrative around, you got to be trauma informed, you got to be trauma informed,
Mm,
which is true to a degree, but actually it's a bit of a fear mongering term,
yeah,
the way
yeah,
that it's used.
yeah. I can actually see that now when you see it on social media. Right, it's very serious, and
Yes, it's heavy. It's so heavy. And it's like, actually, it doesn't give people permission to support people through healing in a full way.
wow. No, that's amazing. I think that's such a powerful thing that you're doing, because obviously you've seen in your background being a psychologist and how the term trauma has been, and then now seeing it in the spiritual world. It's like you're bringing in a blend of both in together, which is quite magical.
Yes. And I wonder, with the words trauma informed, like, where have those words come from?
Yeah, I do
It's,
wonder.
it's probably come from professionals who are trying to protect all the hard work they've put into their practice.
Oh,
Do you know what I mean?
I
Like,
never
where
thought about that. Yeah.
it's come from, like, quite traditional spaces, probably, where it's like, okay, well, we don't want other people to do this work, so let's protect
Wow.
it. Let's protect it. It's ours, it's ours, not other people's.
Oh, that is sad, isn't it? The world. But then what are these labels, right? This is the thing. I don't know if you were the same, but in the beginning, I used to like I might my what I was doing was changing. It was like life coach, then transformational coach, and it just kept changing. And then I realized, what the hell am I doing? The gifts
Yeah.
that I give are far beyond the label.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
but we need that name for then people to understand what we do. But I think there's so much importance, like you said, the trauma informed, to hold on to it. But actually, there's more beyond that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We are coming towards the end of the show. I've just got two questions there for you. What are your 5 top tips for someone who wants to become wild and free but doesn't know where to start?
So, wild and free. So first of all, there's this perception of like what is wild and free, because like that whole narrative has probably had a negative association, especially as women.
Yeah.
When you think of like the wild and free woman, the wild and free woman has probably been seen as like, drinks too much, is a bit loose,
Love it.
like too sexually free, or or something like that. Like the wild and free woman is the woman who feels free to express herself, whether that's like in private or in public. Like, she can express who she is without the constant fear of judgment. She
Mm.
just gets to be her. She gets to surrender to all of who she is. So, like, one of the steps is deconditioning what people think that means,
Mm.
because the wild and free woman, she has permission to do the things that fill her up with joy.
Yeah.
That could be going cold water swimming.
Mm.
It could be like having a really nourishing bath in the middle of the day.
Mm.
It doesn't have to be like, okay, I'm going to travel the world. It could be that as well,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to up and leave and travel the world. So it could be that, but it could be the simplest of things. There's so much wrapped around the wild woman, which is actually around permission and safety to be free, to be in free expression, to be in a life of choice and joy. So, like, shifting the narrative around that. The second thing is like, doing the shadow work. So, like, for me, for example, I've always been this sensual woman. I've always danced in like a sensual way. I've always expressed myself in that way, and it was like such a suppressed part of me.
Mm.
And part of being a wild woman has been, or like adopting my wholeness,
Yeah.
has been going to those places and allowing those parts of me to be seen. And
Mm.
I've kind of had to like really go for it at times. Like, you know it can be in so many different ways. I've had to like really go through a process of exploring what that looks like for me. And that's also evolved over time. And you can see on my Instagram that it's evolved. So yeah, that's also part of it, like accepting those shadows, accepting the parts of you that you've suppressed, that you've shamed, and inviting those parts of you in to your life, and not pushing them away, but actually looking at why they do bring you shame
Yeah.
and embracing them.
I really understand what you're saying because, and I don't know if you had the same, was like being in the cultures we grew up, like it was shameful to show some skin and it was shameful to be wild and free and it was shameful to just be sensual.
Yeah.
And I remember when I started my inner work 11 years ago, I had to really peel off those layers of judgment and how I was made to feel for wearing hot pants on a night out, for example, or a short top. And it was
Yeah.
allowing myself to just express myself the way I want to.
Yes. Yet at the same time, I don't know about your specific lineage, but in like, when you look at saris,
Oh
when you look
yeah.
at
Yeah.
Asian wear, when you look at Asian dancing, it is so damn sensual. It's
Yeah.
it's highly sensual and quite sexual as well, actually.
And it's seen as normal.
And so actually we're from lineages that naturally embody sensuality,
Yeah.
yet it's like this thing of, okay, well, it can only be permitted in these situations and contexts.
Yeah.
It's only permitted on a film, on a Bollywood film or something, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're like in an Asian dance show,
Yeah.
you can show that sensuality. Or if you're going to a wedding and you're wearing a sari, right? It's like saris are so sexy and sensual, but it's like in that context it's okay. But wearing hot pants to nightclub,
What I used to find so funny was like, you might wear a sari and you might show a bit of your stomach, or and then an old woman would come up to you and have a go at you or say, "Oh, that's a bit too revealing," and you're thinking, "Hold up, your stomach is out and nobody's saying anything, but you're having a go at me." It's like, it's a contradiction in that.
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Sorry, then what are the other three top tips for someone who
Um,
wants to become wild and free?
so I said about the narratives. The other one is, I think I've referred to this already, but permission.
Yes.
Like you've got to start giving yourself that permission to meet your needs. You
Mm.
know, you're not here to serve everybody else all the time. And that's the generational thing that a lot of people are brought up with from lots of different cultures, that the women are secondary or third or fourth along the line in terms of meeting their needs. So it's like my mum, you know, she always serves us the food. And
Mm.
then it's like she won't come and sit down and eat with us because
Mm.
she's running around serving and making sure whether we want a second serve of food, or she's so conditioned in that role.
Yeah.
And it's like she would only eat at the end.
Oh.
So we've had to like really kind of say like, come and sit down and eat with us. So when you've been brought up with like the woman historically, like I said, in so many communities
Yeah.
is like the bottom of the pecking order. It's like, okay, now you get to actually give yourself permission to serve your own needs. So anybody listening to this, it's like, okay, like how can you start caring for what you need even more today, and how can you stop making that a bad thing? Because
Yeah.
it's not a bad thing. You get to feel how you want to, like how it is that you're feeling about something. It doesn't make you bad. You get to go after your desires, your joys, the things that you want to do, the fun things. And like you don't need to apologize for that. There's
Mm.
a huge piece around permission. The other bit is like tapping into play. Like I said earlier on, what does wild woman, what does freedom look like to you? What does play look like to you? And that's going to be an individual journey. So you've got to work out like what are the things that bring me that joy? And it's not about like escapism, you
Mm.
know. When you want to escape and run away, that's because you're not happy
Mm.
with something. Whereas if it's like this, I desire to experience this thing, it could even be a materialistic thing. It's like, I really desire to, like, actually, I really want to treat myself to this purse or this coat or whatever it is. And I really desire it, I really desire the sensuality of that item,
Mm.
the kind of the specialness of it, the luxury of it. So it's kind of working out like, what is it that's going to bring you that playfulness, that joy, that yeah, that wildness. And the final thing, the final thing is what environments and what relationships allow your wild woman to be expressed,
Mm.
because that like often is an indicator of where you feel safe to be you. So
Mm.
again, it's like a good exploratory question of like, okay, where do you feel safe to be you? And it might be when I'm on my own. So it's like then an invitation of, okay, maybe I need to start exploring other environments where I potentially can just show up as myself. And this is where there are beautiful, spiritual spaces to do that in, where it's like you get to just show up as you and you're accepted.
That's beautiful. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you for sharing those. And my last question is, what are you most grateful for?
I am most grateful for my healing journey. Yeah, I am just so grateful for like finding this path. And to put it into context, like I'm 43 and I only found like spirituality and self-development in the last 4 years.
Wow.
And my life has changed just in such incredible ways. And I don't mean like I have like all this wealth or, the typical things that like people talk about. I want those things as well. Nothing wrong with wanting it as well, right?
Yeah.
It's not in that way, but it's been more in how I perceive life, my relationship with myself. I feel free. Like I don't have anything, I don't think, within me, which which I feel like this sense of shame around. So I just carried so much shame.
Yeah.
And I don't have secrets. I don't have any secrets. When you've been living a life in secrecy,
Yeah.
you come out of that secrecy and be like, oh, do you know what? I've got no secrets. I've got nothing to hide.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So I'm just so grateful to be in that space and in this space within that healing of like limitless possibility, to be in the mindset of I get to change any pattern of behavior that isn't serving me.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Rathika, for just coming back home to yourself and really trusting the medicine from within, because what you're doing is amazing and you're helping so many other women to come back home to themselves.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. I absolutely love this episode with Radhika because it's so important to really love and accept yourself and surrender to who you are supposed to be in this world. And Radhika beautifully did that. She had this psychology background, but she's like, I really need to go into the depths of the spiritual world and really, take my power back as a woman, as a creator, as a weaver, as somebody that helps women to heal. And she's really done that, and I honor that, because I think sometimes the systems that we grow up in or the education system that we've learnt things doesn't always shape what reality is out there. And everybody's journey of going from within is different. So we really do all need to go back home within ourselves, take the tools externally, but also go from within and really listen to what we need and what needs to be healed. It's really a blessing that we get to do this work in this lifetime and really get to heal and nourish ourselves and come back to ourselves as women, because for decades before us, women, have suffered on deeper levels. I'm not saying that we haven't suffered either, but, didn't have, a right to have a home, didn't have money, didn't have access to be independent. And here we are in this modern world now where we get to be who and do and be whoever we want to be. Yet there's still the deeper layers of generational and familial, ancestral and cultural traumas that really need to be healed so we can really truly set ourselves free from within. We can free from the external view, but we also need to heal internally so we really do grow and flourish and prosper. I could really go on and carry on, but unfortunately it is the end of the episode. But I really want to leave you with this quote that came to me when I decided to talk to Rathika, and it was, what happens when women open their hearts? They get better. That's a quote by Haruki Murakami. Now, if you're feeling called to really take your power back, transform your trauma, and learn to trust from within, then direct message me about how I can help you heal for the next 4 months of your journey, so you can really let the past go and honor who you are and rebirth the new you. Just send me a message at IamGurds, which is on Instagram, IamGurds, or you can also book in a form that's on my website for a discovery call, and we can take it from there. Take care, my sisters. Bye. And remember, stay happy, stay healthy, stay lit.